Okay, I think we can start now. We waited for a couple of minutes. People are still joining, but they will catch up where we will be. And at the beginning, I just want to say thank you all for being here today, and that I'm happy to see you all, at least the panelists. And I'm also happy that we have the guests and participants from across the region. Uh, we expect more than 100 participants, so that's why everyone is muted. And when we come to the discussion part, you can all raise your hands or give a sign to our organizers so that you can have your say. You can write your comments in the chat, or you can speak once organizers unmute your microphones. This is the technical part. Additionally, we have translation in Western Balkan languages as well as English. So if you want to listen to any particular language, just click the uh, globus button where the interpretation is, and you will see the different channels for English, Macedonian, Albanian, and Serbian. And you can move in between them in case one of the speakers decides to speak in their own language. We have English as a formal language, but of course we can speak in our languages as well. Since we have translation, it would be easy to follow any language that is being translated. At the start, these are the technicalities. If I'm missing something, we will add our notes in the chat and share them with the participants. But for the time being, I would just want to say that at the beginning, you all have the agenda, but at the beginning, we will have short opening remarks by Helen Franke, who is here with us today. And then, thank you, Helen, for being here. And then our partners will follow up. Julia will follow up, our regional expert, and our dear collaborator. She will follow up with the regional perspective, and then the partners will jump in with a national overview of what has been going on. But and in the end, we can have an open discussion and reflections from shareholders and any comments that you find useful. So far, it won't be an interactive session during the first hour, but I believe there will be a lot to say after we share some results with you from this 4-year regional action that was funded by European Union and co-funded by Sweden. It has been an interesting 4 years, but before I say anything about that, I would give the floor to Helen Franke, who is head of sector at DG NEAR, and we would like to hear her point of view regarding this action and regarding the gender mainstreaming of the EU accession process and the region in general. Thank you, Helen, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So first of all, welcome everyone to the event. As you know, it's being organized under the EU-funded regional network EquiPro coalition that we've been supporting. And I want to start by thanking all of the partners of EquiPro for the successful implementation of the project, first of all. Then I'd like to thank Sweden for the valuable co-financing of the project, and to say that I'm very happy to be here and look forward to hearing the findings of the research, and especially the recommendations for the national authorities and stakeholders, but importantly to us in the EU as well. I, of course, we in the EU, we value the recommendations and inputs provided by civil society actors. We think that it can really help us to improve our policies and our work. And your work in particular as a coalition is really essential to advance gender equality in the region. Gender equality and women's rights are, of course, a really essential element of the enlargement process. Project like this one also help us identify what are the remaining challenges and what are the main drivers for change, which is very important. So as you know, our work on gender equality is guided by the EU gender equality strategy. And when it comes to the external actions, in particular, the EU Gender Action Plan 3, which was extended late last year to cover the remainder of the current MFF, so until 2027. And as all of you know, of course, 85% of all of our external actions need to contribute to gender equality, and it's a really important goal. And we can see that the goal that we're moving gradually towards meeting the goal, right? So looking globally, this is from the GAP3 midterm report. We see that globally, we went from 65% in 2019 before the GAP3 of actions having gender equality as a principle or significant objective to 72% in 2022. And another figure that we can compare is that gender equality and women's empowerment as policy objectives increased from around 9 billion euros worth of assistance to 13 billion from 21 to 22. And so it's gradually moving in the right direction. But of course, there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think especially to ensure accountability. And I just attended yesterday, actually, a lunch seminar on gender responsive leadership organized by the Swedish government. And I found it very interesting. And of course, I'm convinced that this is a really important piece of the puzzle, right? So gender equality structures really need to be built up to function regardless of specific individuals' commitments, which I fear is the way things are done currently to a large extent. So we face some challenges within the EU, that's clear, but there's also the other side of the coin. So the gender equality structures within the governments, and the governments are actually in the driving seat when it comes to accession, of course, and programming of IPA 3, and not to forget the new reform agendas. It's very important. And this, I think, is where your role as civil society comes in. So to hold us and the governments in the region accountable. And we're committed to supporting civil society to fulfill this role. So we're currently finalizing the adoption of the new civil society facility and media program, and it will cover 2024 and 25 programming. We're also in the middle of evaluating our latest call for proposals for regional CSO networks, where we've included a specific lot on gender equality this time around. So this represents a natural continuation of our support to civil society and media in the region during IPA 2 period, and then it was 333 million euro in total. And now, in the first 5 years of this MFF, we've already reached 350 million euros. So we're increasing our support to civil society because there's still 2 more years that need to be programmed, right? That are not included in that overall sum. So this, I also want to say that this project makes a really important contribution to regional dialogue, regional cooperation, and just creating networking opportunities. Which obviously gives all of us a chance to exchange views and opinions and experience, which is very important. And I think this regional exchange is really vital. So with that in mind, I wanted to take this opportunity to share with you that the 2024 edition of the EU Civil Society Forum will be held between 11th and 13th of June in Belgrade this year. And so I hope to see many of you there. And with that, I wish you successful and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, so much for the kind words and for pointing out the important things when it comes to the EU accession of the Western Balkans and the external support of the EU that has been gender sensitive throughout the years. And we are glad to hear that there are improvements and positive shifts while we are moving forward. And let's hope that by 2027 we will have even better results. And one of the reasons why we decided to do this action in the first place was actually this, to closely follow the implementation of GAP3 in the region through the newly installed country implementation plans, the CLIPS, which happened during crisis and during very difficult times. And it is exactly in the times of crisis that we can harness even more results if we are properly supported. And this is actually what happened, because unfortunately our action was coinciding with with a poly crisis, let's say. It started with the COVID-19, and then it moved with the disturbed peace on the eastern side, on the eastern parts of the globe, and so many other challenges happened throughout the way. But it also helped us check where we are, and by the EU and Sweden support that we have, we managed to finalize the planned activities, parallelly monitoring the processes that are contributing towards improvements when it comes to gender equality, but also fulfilling the gap for the Western Balkans, which is a tiny territory and it's not often visible in the midterm report that Helen mentioned. So we believe that the work, especially the work under the component where the monitoring of the EU accession process falls within, is crucial both for us and for the stakeholders at EU and national level as well. And as a region, I think we can function even better because we are stronger together. And I think that this action has shown what joint actions can do. And to cut the story short, we believe that we can contribute to the transformation of our society at the end of the day and make them more humane by improving the gender mechanisms in our countries and contributing towards shadow reporting, but also towards policy creation and decision making, which involves women as such, because women are half of our society, and their words and their needs need to be heard and addressed. So in order to save time, I will give the floor now to Giulia Pasquinelli, our regional researcher, who was in charge for compiling the regional report, which was based on the national reports that each of our partner organizations have compiled. Here we have our partners, but we will introduce them later on. And now I will give the floor to Giulia to say something more about the methodology that was created as part of this action, and monitoring at regional level with some snapshots for country specifics, which will be then followed by a more in-depth approach from our partners. Thank you, Giulia. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I hope that you can see me and hear me well. It's really a privilege to be here today with you, and I will have the task of presenting the findings from the regional report that was carried out in 2023. I will share my screen to show you the PowerPoint, so just let me know if everything goes well and you can see properly. Sorry, I'll try again. For some reason, it asked me to allow it, and hopefully
There
now
it is.
it's working.
Yeah, it's working now.
Right. So it should be working now. Yes. Okay, so the title of our report is Towards an Inclusive Accession, EU Accession Process in the Western Balkans from a Gender Perspective. Just a few words about the report. So Kvinna to Kvinna is a member of the Ukraine Pro Coalition, and as such, it carried out this second regional assessment of the Western Balkans EU accession process from a gender perspective. This is the second regional report, and it marks the closure of the project, which is actually this week. So with the report, I'll give you an overview of the main findings in relation to the integration of a gender perspective in sort of different parts of the EU accession process, including key decision-making fora, policy, but also programmatic documents, such as action documents that are developed under the Instrument for Pre-Accession 3, but also the monitoring tools that are used by the EU, including the country reports. And then we'll provide some recommendations at the end, both to the EU and also to national governments. A few words about the methodology, very, very briefly. This is a bespoke methodology that was developed especially under this project. It includes 51 indicators, both qualitative and quantitative indicators, under 10 different criteria that we have identified at the very beginning of the action. Indicators not only focus on sort of specific accession documents and processes, but are also very closely connected to the Gender Action Plan 3 and to some of the main documents that were developed to implement the Gender Action Plan 3 in the region, including the country-level implementation plans that we will call CLIPs in short. And which we think should also mirror the accession priorities in relation to gender equality. This is the second report, the second regional report that is produced as part of this action. The collection of data was carried out in 2023, but it concerns 2022. So this is just important to note. So for example, when we're going to talk about the country reports and the extent to which they're gender mainstreamed, we looked at the 2022 country reports, so not the latest ones. So this is just to be clear. And the regional report is basically a compilation and an aggregation of analyzes the aggregated data from the individual countries in the region and offers obviously an overview and also a comparison between countries, as well as changes from 2021 to 2022. So this is just to be clear about what we're talking about today. This is an overview of the criteria that we have used and under which we developed the indicators. I'm just going to sort of quickly go through them, but the findings that I will share with you will only concern some of these, just for a question of time, because the report is quite extensive, the indicators are many, and we want to make the sort of best use of our time today. But those that I'm not going to cover in this initial presentation, of course, we can pick them up later in the discussion if you wish, and we can give you more information about them. So the first criterion is country reports gender mainstreamed. The second is stabilization and association committee and subcommittee meetings include gender equality issues. The third is EU strategic engagement on gender equality at country level is in place. The fourth is EU mainstreams gender in all actions and targeted actions. The fifth is EU leads by example. Then we have a number of criteria focusing on national governments. So governments adopt legislation in line with the EU acquis on gender equality and consult with women's organizations, followed by governments implement recommendations on gender equality that are included in the country reports. And then programming of EPA 3 at national level prioritizes gender equality. The ninth is sex disaggregated data is collected by national statistical offices. And finally, national bodies that are responsible for EU integration in the region include staff with gender expertise. And then we had a few regional indicators that we also looked at, and I'll share those during the presentation later on. Looking at the findings now, at least under some of the criteria and some of the ones that we thought were also sort of most relevant, perhaps, for our discussion today. The first looks at the extent to which country reports are gender mainstreamed. Again, just to remember that this concerns 2022 country reports, not 2023. We saw, with regards to the average number of chapters that were gender mainstreamed in 2022, a decrease compared to the average chapters gender mainstreamed in 2021. So it went from 14.35% in 2021 to 13.2%. So a slight decrease. Whereas the opposite trend we've noticed with regards to the number of official recommendations included in the country reports and specifically pertaining gender equality issues. So here the number went from 1.6 in 2021 to 2.8 in 2022. So a slight increase. But overall, what we would say is that gender mainstreaming of the country reports did not change substantially from one year to the other. And in most cases, for most countries, it usually fails to go beyond the traditional chapters that are chapter 23 and chapter 19, that are usually sort of those that are most focusing on gender equality issues. But we have a good practice example, which is Kosovo, the Kosovo country report, which had 37% of its chapters being gender mainstreamed in 2022. So this is certainly something to sort of aspire to, and hopefully also to improve in the future. In relation to the second criteria, stabilization and association committee meetings and subcommittee meetings include gender equality. So the assessment of the inclusion of gender issues in both agendas and conclusions of these meetings was actually not possible for 3 countries. And this is because these documents are generally not publicly available and could not be accessed for 3 countries. So the only data that we have is for the other 3 countries. Some improvement was noted from 2021 to 2022 for Bosnia and Herzegovina and North Macedonia in relation to the extent to which these documents include gender equality issues. We've also looked at the extent to which women civil society organizations were consulted ahead of SAA subcommittee meetings, and this was ranged in the different countries from minimal to moderate, with improvements in particular in Albania and Montenegro for 2022. And here also we have a best practice from Kosovo in relation to consultation of women CSOs, but I will not go in detail in that because our colleague from Kosovo Women's Network will say more about it. Under criterion C, so EU strategic engagement on gender equality at country level, which is directly linked to the Gender Action Plan 3, we noted, but this was already there in the previous report, that all countries have developed country-level implementation plans in 2021, CLIPS. And in Albania, in Kosovo, and North Macedonia, this was done with extensive consultation of women CSOs. So this is certainly something positive that we noted. With the exception of Kosovo for this year's report, so for 2022, there were no gender analysis that were conducted in the other Western Balkan countries. And then in terms of the extent to which dialogue between EU delegations or the EU office and civil society, including women civil society organizations, on gender equality took place. This was rated from moderate to extensive, in Albania and Montenegro in 2022. And also, I would say that we have a good practice example here from Serbia, where there is actually after the adoption of the country-level implementation plans, regular consultation and exchanges between women civil society organizations and EU delegation on specific areas and specific gender equality issues as part of the sort of CLIP process. However, one negative finding with regards to dialogue is that it appears that there is no dialogue specifically on women, peace and security issues, which are obviously very important for a post-conflict region like the Western Balkans. And this is something that was also captured in the midterm review of the Gender Action Plan 3, actually. So it's not something new, but it's something that we also noticed and that it would be important to address. In relation to criterion D, which is EU mainstreams gender in all actions and targeted actions, this is a bit a problematic indicator for us. So what we monitored is the percentage and actually also the number, but I will talk about the percentage here, of new actions that are gender responsive, so that were marked either with gender marker 1 or 2 at country level. And for this, we've seen that the percentage went up from 75.6% in 2021 to 90% in 2022. So on paper, this looks like a very positive achievement, especially in light of the fact that under the Gender Action Plan 3, the aim was to reach 85% of new actions being marked gender marker 1 or 2. However, when we moved on to actually analyze the action documents at national level, it emerged that many of the actions were actually incorrectly marked, so that they did not respect the minimum criteria established by the OECD DAC. So this is something that we've actually raised also in the previous report, and it's certainly something that needs to be addressed, because it suggests that there is no sort of common and shared understanding within the EU and by the staff about how to use the gender marker. So this is something that needs to be urgently corrected. And then one other indicator that I wanted to flag for our discussion is that we wanted to track and to capture the amount of funding directed towards women's organizations and movements at country level. And unfortunately, this data does not exist. So the EU doesn't really have a system of tracking the amount of funding for gender equality that reaches different beneficiaries. So in fact, we don't know how much of this is specifically going to women's organizations, and obviously it would be an incredibly important sort of data to have and to collect, especially in light of the fact that Gender Action Plan 3 pledged to increase the amount of funding to women's organizations. So we need to have baseline, and we need to see how this is progressing. In relation to the extent to which governments adopt legislation in line with the EU acquis on gender equality and also consults with women CSOs, we found that, here we had different indicators under this criteria, and the extent to which key laws on gender equality in relation to the accession process were open for public consultation was rated as moderate, and the extent to which inputs that is provided by women's civil society organizations on these laws and policies and was taken on board was also rated as moderate. And finally, we've also looked at the sectoral strategies and the extent to which they were publicly available. And this was rated as sort of fully publicly available. I think one of the issues that we found here in terms of sort of the additional information and data that was collected under these indicators was that, yes, to a certain extent, there are now opportunities for women civil society organizations to provide input, to have their say on specific laws on gender equality, on domestic violence, and on a lot of different issues that are relevant to them and to the work that they do. However, usually there is a bit of a broken feedback loop. And it's usually hard for them to know how much of their input and contributions are actually taken on board, and the reasoning behind those inputs and contributions not being taken on board. So certainly a lot that governments could improve in that sense. And also maybe just to flag, although this is obviously very well known because it was also indicated by the most recent country report for Bosnia-Herzegovina, that the country still does not have a national program for the adoption of the acquis, and therefore this is something that is, a target that has not been met by the country. In relation to the extent to which governments implement the recommendations that are provided by the EU in the country reports in relation to gender equality, this was rated from minimal to moderate in 2022 in the 6 different countries, with a slight decrease compared to 2021. We have a positive example here from Albania, where the recommendation that was included by the EU in relation to improving access to health services for different marginalized groups was considered to be partially addressed by the government. However, I think here a point needs to be made overall on the need for very clear, very action-oriented recommendations on issues that pertain gender equality, as well as other issues, obviously, in the country reports, but also on the criteria for removing the recommendations, because sometimes we've noticed that recommendations may be removed even though they have not been fully implemented. So this is just an additional note that I wanted to make. Then in relation to programming of the instrument for peer accession 3 at country level and the extent to which it prioritizes gender equality, we've looked at whether women civil society organizations were consulted in the development of the strategic responses to the programming of IPA 3, which are basically the government's response to this programming instrument with the strategic priorities. And in 3 countries out of 6, they were not consulted at all. And in the others, consultation was rated from minimal to moderate. And in relation to the extent to which the strategic responses include gender equality objectives, in Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and North Macedonia, this was considered that they were included, but only from sort of a minimal to a moderate extent. In Kosovo, Serbia, the strategic responses are actually not publicly available. And women civil society organizations were not consulted. So this definitely hinders the transparency and inclusiveness of the process, particularly as these processes are very important because they set the strategic spending priorities by the country, and therefore this is something that would definitely need to be reversed by the national governments. Oh, sorry. Briefly on a couple of the regional indicators, just wanted to capture this about the percentage of new actions that gender responsive at regional level, so that come from sort of the regional pot of IPA 3. We had a similar trend compared to the ones at national level. So there was an increase from 48% in 2021 to 75% in 2022. However, for these ones, we need to make the same sort of word of caution and warning about the incorrect marking of the action documents, which was also the case for the regional action documents. And if you look at the report in the Annex 1, it actually indicates why these documents were incorrectly marked. And same goes for, for the gender targeted action, so the one that was marked gender marker 2. So if you want to see more details about that, you can look at the report. In terms of conclusions, very briefly, I think what we've noticed from this year's report and from the analysis that we carried out and the findings that emerged is that indeed the accession process remains in many ways the main driver of pro-democratic reforms and specifically advancement of gender equality in the Western laws that are in line with the EU acquis on gender equality, for example, but also in many other areas. However, results continue to be a bit mixed. In fact, while the findings of the report show that there was some positive developments, there would need to be further monitoring to assess how substantive, transformative, and also sustainable some of these changes are. The incorrect marking of the action documents lead to a big misrepresentation in the allocation of EU funds and the extent to which they contribute to gender equality. So this is something that would definitely need to be addressed. And in general, both on the side of the EU, but also on the side of the national governments, there would need to be greater efforts towards transparency and inclusiveness of these processes. Now, I picked a few recommendations for the EU and a few for national governments, but we have many more in the report. So if you want to look at the full set of recommendations, please go and check out the report. On transparency and inclusion, we've recommended to publish all of the relevant documents that are connected to the EU accession process on the relevant web pages, including, if possible, agendas and conclusions of the SAA committee and subcommittee meetings, and to try and further inform and involve citizens and civil society organizations in some of the key steps of the EU accession process. And publish all the accession-related documents and information in local languages where possible, also on the EU delegations' websites. In relation to funding for gender equality, train EU delegation staff, but obviously also staff in DG NEAR on the appropriate use of the gender markers based on the OECD DAC criteria, and establish internal quality control mechanisms that would ensure that action documents are in fact marked correctly. Improve the OPSIS system to track accurately the amount of funding, not just allocated to gender equality, but how it reaches different beneficiaries, including women civil society organizations. And this would allow the collection of data for also the Gender Action Plan 3 in relation to that indicator on increasing the amount of funding for women CSOs. And then publish relevant data every year on the Commission and EUD's web pages. 2 Western Balkan national governments, also on transparency and inclusion, publish information about the composition of sector working groups for EU integration. Also on their side, publish agendas and conclusions of the SAA committee and subcommittee meetings, and provide more accurate and user-friendly information about the country's engagement in the accession process and opportunities for civil society to contribute and engage in the process. publish the instrument for pre-accession 3 strategic responses and make it accessible to citizens on governments' websites. Consider quotas or other tools for the inclusions of CSOs within the sector working groups, including at least one women civil society organizations elected by their peers to represent civil society interests, and support the inclusion of gender perspective across different sectors and themes. Or alternative, set up clear, structured and meaningful consultation mechanisms between sector working groups and civil society organizations, including women CSOs. On inclusive dialogue, strengthen consultation mechanisms as part of the EU accession process, especially in relation to key reforms and pieces of legislation that are adopted. Consult more with diverse women's organizations, not just the ones that are based in capitals, and allow time for preparation, improving modalities for meaningful participation, and ideally providing feedback afterwards, so closing the feedback loop. And finally, consult CSOs, including women CSOs, in the development of the instrument for pre-accession 3 strategic response, their future revisions, and in designing action documents where possible. I think I will leave it at that. And I thank you very much for your time, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks a lot, Julia. It was quite a challenge to talk about all the results while in such a short time. Sorry, I had an interference from translation and I had to turn it off. So this was only a snapshot at the findings, and I just want to mention that there were 2 different monitoring periods. It's 2021 was the first reference year, the baseline year, and then we had 2022, the follow-up year. There are no results for 2023 because in order to have the data for 2023, the year has to be completed, and it has just completed, while this report was the national reports were completed during the last summer, and the regional report was compiled based on the national report. So just to avoid any confusion, the publication date of the reports does not coincide with the reference monitoring year. So although the regional report is published in 2024, the results are concerning 2022. And when it comes to the country reports that Julia mentioned at the start, this was one of the first criteria that we were analyzing. I need to point out that there is another EU advocacy program managed by Quina Till Quina, and there we have a more in-depth qualitative analysis of the country reports, while in this monitoring exercise, we only tackle with some quantification of how the country reports are progressing or not progressing. So if you need more information on this, there will be a newly published gender analysis of the new country reports over the spring, and you can always reach us for more information. Thank you, Julia, for this. You mentioned most of the recommendations that are important and some of the criteria out of 10. I think you have covered 6, but our partners will follow with more details. I just wanted to mention that some of the recommendations are already taking place. And this event is part of our wider advocacy at EU regional and national level. And even by speaking to stakeholders, I think we can make changes, because this is how we manage to make reflections among us and see where we can find improvements. For example, the OPSIS system already marked some improvements during the 2023, and our next monitoring exercise will follow these improvements and see how fragile or not fragile they are, especially because we are still living in times of crisis, and this is illuminating our work, but it also allows us to reflect and move forward. So now I'm giving the floor to my colleague from Montenegro, Anita Stjepčević. Sorry, Anita will take over the floor and moderate the next session, where our partners will try to share some more information at country level. Thank you, Anita. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Tanya. Esteemed representatives of the EU institutions, national stakeholders, dear fellows from the women's civil society sector, and all those people whose attention we are having today, allow me to greet you on behalf of the Women's Rights Center, Montenegro. I'm Anita Sjevčević, and I will be moderating today's discussion, where we plan to present the country briefs, actually the key challenges and best practices occurred within the implementation of this, I would rather say, valuable action. So now we're going to hear more about the main conclusions at the country level and the national or the country specifics, of course, within the context of the EU accession taken from the gender lenses. I have the honor in this framework to call our first partner, which is Ines Leskai, Executive Director of the Albanian Women Empowerment Network, who will present a bit more in detail the state of play of gender equality in Albania. Ines?
Thank you, Anita. Thank you all. And thanks to Julia for her thorough, let's say, presentation. Still, we will have a little more time to go in depth, let's say, or not in depth, but to do a summary and the presentation of our context and country reports in this relation. I'm going to start with the fact that Albania used to be a good practice in terms of collaboration with the EU delegation in the country and on consultations about gender equality in general, and more specifically on Gender Action Plan 2 and Gender Action Plan 3. I would like as well to add that nevertheless, this type of collaboration unfortunately has not been coherent and has not continued during this last period. Anyway, according to the information, going back to the report now, according to the information that we have already received from the EUD, the EU delegation in Albania, commissioned an external company during 2001, in April 2001, to produce a gender country profile. This is important because it included different analysis of different sectors. Findings from these country gender profiles have been used as well for the implementation and are still being used for the implementation of IPA 3 preparation. This profile has not been updated regarding or for the year 2002, and I believe it's the same for the year 2003 as well. This document is used, for example, for the drafting of the country-level implementation plan, for the CLIP plans. And in 2021, EUD prepared the CLIP plan and conducted a mapping of the sector analysis. While in 2022, there were not standalone analysis of these sectors, but gender assessments have been included in the framework of action documents as well as the developments of the EU for Gender Equality 2 project. Anyway, I would like to add or emphasize what Julia already mentioned, that the EU delegation engages regularly with a government and gender equality mechanism at national level through different coordination mechanisms or gender equality national councils, which Awen is as well part as a representative of the civil society organization, and as well through the coordination with different bodies of the government in Albania in relation to the EU integration process. According to EU, to both EU delegations and civil society organizations that we have met and we have interviewed for this report, the delegation has engaged civil society organizations in the development of the clip. We have this very good practice, as I mentioned in the beginning. During 2021, the delegation has, through AWEN, Albanian Women Empowerment Network, conducting an assessment and a very good partnership and collaboration with 37 other women's organizations in order to understand better what they needed from the engagement, the collaboration, and from the partnership with the women CSOs in relation to the clip. And we received some very good, let's say, ideas from women's organizations and as well recommendations that we have prepared. We have distributed among other organizations, state institutions, and of course shared with the EU. And these recommendations are pretty similar to what are the recommendations of these reports, the analysis reports that we are talking about now, and as well the findings and conclusions. I'm still emphasizing this just to inform or share with you again the concern that since 2021 there is more or less or pretty much the situation remains the same in terms of consultation process with civil society organizations. In this regard, we have recommended back then, and still we continue to recommend, more formalized mechanism for engaging civil society organizations, women's organizations, especially to be part of these subcommittee meetings, and as well, what's more important, opening negotiation chapters that would streamline the process, especially involving CSOs that are based outside the capital, outside Tirana, and provides some local perspectives on citizens' situation, context, and especially girls and women context and situation in the country. In relation to the dialogue, again, with the civil society on women, peace, and security issues, the EUD in Albania has supported the Women, Peace, and Security agenda and the process, along with the National Action Plan, together with other important international donors like OSCE, like US Embassy, UN Women in Albania, and the Dutch Embassy, and some other partners. AWEN and other women's organizations through coalition have been as well part of this important process of the drafting of the first National Action Plan on Women's Peace and Security agenda and second National Action Plan, and still the involvement from the EU delegation in Albania of women's organizations and the considerations, let's say, in this process has not been in its highest levels, let's say. While, of course, we have an analysis in terms of the funds and the percentage of the funding in comparison to 2021. Overall, there is an improvement in gender mainstreaming in terms of the 2022-2023 actions and gender mainstreaming, more specifically targeting gender equalities. There are more indicators, sex disaggregated as one of our recommendations, and more funding seems to be available, let's say, to take gender equality issues.
Yes. Thank you, Ines. Thank you, Ines. Sorry for interrupting you, but we should really try to stick to the agenda to allow the opportunity for all the partners to speak and to have an open discussion. So we are now going to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Diana Šehić, Director of the Rights for All. Diana, please.
Hvala, Anita. Dobar dan svima. Obzirom da, kako je Tanja rekla u uvodu, imamo prevod na sve jezike Zapadnog Balkana, ja ću iskoristiti tu priliku i govoriti na bosanskom jeziku. Veliko mi je zadovoljstvo danas učestvovati na ovom webinaru i prenijeti neka zapažanja i neke rezultate monitoring procesa koji je proveden u Bosni i Hercegovini kroz svojih 5-6 minuta koliko je planirano. Hvala Đulija na zanimljivoj prezentaciji informacija sa regionalnog aspekta. I ja moram da kažem da smo mi, evo počet ću s tim, prošle mjeseca imali jedan jako dobar razgovor kroz prezentiranje podataka iz Bosne i Hercegovine sa predstavnicima civilnog društva, sa predstavnicima delegacije u Bosni i Hercegovini, ministarstava sa državnog nivoa i zaista smo zadovoljni u kojoj mjeri su prihvatili i naše preporuke i nekako djeluje obećavajuće u smislu napređenja naše saradnje u narednom periodu. Što se tiče Bosne i Hercegovine, nažalost moram da kažem da mi u značajnoj mjeri zaostajemo za zemljama regiona kada je u pitanju prvo proces evropskih integracija uopšte, a zatim kada je u pitanju proces integrisanja principa rodne ravnopravnosti kroz proces evropskih integracija, iako moram da kažem da ženske organizacije civilnog društva u velikoj mjeri ulažu napore da se to promijeni. Ja ću početi sa svojim kratkim pregledom nekih ključnih podataka iz ovog monitoringa sa državnim izvještajem za Bosnu i Hercegovinu. On je nama jako u Bosni i Hercegovini važan, obzirom da, kako je Đulija istakla, i to i ja moram da kažem, nažalost Bosna i Hercegovina još uvijek nema usvojen nacionalni plan za usvajanje pravne tekovine Evropske unije. Mi smo još uvijek jako daleko od otvaranja pregovora. Politički lideri deklarativno su svi za proces Evropske unije, vrlo malo se čini da dođe do otvaranja pregovora i u tom smislu evo možemo biti samo optimisti. To je otprilike što sad možemo da radimo i da nastavimo da radimo svoj posao onako kako radimo. Zbog toga je nama državni izvještaj koji se izdaje za Bosnu i Hercegovinu jako značajan i koristimo ga u velikoj mjeri kao pritisak s jedne strane na ispunjavanje obaveze integrisanja principa rodne ravnopravnosti kroz izvještaj, ali na delegaciju, ali isto tako kao jedan veliki zagovarački pritisak na naše institucije da ispune sve ono što se u tom izvještaju navodi. Međutim, i tu moram da kažem da ipak nismo u potpunosti zadovoljni kada je u pitanju napredak u smislu integrisanja principa rodne ravnopravnosti kada je u pitanju integrisanje principa rodne ravnopravnosti u izvještaju. Mi smatramo da, i o tome smo razgovarali na prezentaciji prošli mjeseci sa predstavnicima iz delegacije, mi civilnog društva evo želimo da kažemo da se smanji malo taj diplomatski jezik koji se koristi kada se izrađuju ovi izvještaji i kada se izrađuju preporuke od strane Evropske unije. Željeli bismo da vidimo malo konkretnije preporuke, malo jasnije preporuke, direktnije preporuke i to je ono što mi kroz svoje komentare kada se obraćamo za prilikom izrade ovih izvještaja stalno potenciramo. Smatramo da broj preporuka također treba da bude veći. Princip rodne ravnopravnosti mora biti sadržan u svim sekcijama, u svim sektorima ovog državnog izvještaja, jer svako pitanje jeste pitanje rodne ravnopravnosti, svako pitanje ljudskih prava jeste pitanje ženskih ljudskih prava, pogotovo u Bosni i Hercegovini. Mislim da zaista treba biti vrlo jasan, vrlo konkretan i vrlo direktan. Tako mi komuniciramo i voljeli bismo da na taj način nekako postignemo neku saglasnost. Željeli bismo dakle da vidimo da postojeći procesi savjetovanja kada je u pitanju sa dijalog i saradnja sa delegacijom Evropske unije bude unaprijeđen. Mislimo da ima prostora za unapređenje. Ja moram da kažem da se, evo recimo kroz ove 4 godine rada na ovom projektu vidi u kolikoj mjeri su ovi projekti značajni, jer oni nam na neki način otvaraju mogućnosti za unapređenje saradnje i sa delegacijom u zemlji, jer nekako smo i sarađivali s njima kroz izradu ovog monitoringa, je li tako, ali na neki način nam otvaraju i šire mogućnost saradnje sa ministarstvima i sa nadležnim institucijama i pitanje integrisanja rodne ravnopravnosti kroz proces evropske integracija stavlja na agendu, stavlja na dnevni red, kako na nacionalnom nivou, tako i na međunarodnom nivou. Ja želim još ovde da kažem da kada je u pitanju ispunjavanje preporuka i obaveza i oni koji se navode u ili koji pozivaju na akciju kroz izveštaj delegacije za Bosnu i Hercegovinu, nažalost nema nekog značajnijeg napretka kada je u pitanju provođenje tih preporuka od strane naše institucija. Vidimo da se oni prilično ležerno odnose prema tim diplomatskim izraženim preporukama i pozivima. Dakle, zbog toga smatramo da u tom smislu treba malo napraviti određene promjene i unapređenje.
Diana, sorry, but can we then conclude and move forward?
I spent 4 minutes, I have one more. I will say in this because I'm looking. In the last minute, izvinjavam se. Prešla sam na engleski jer me Anita a ja insistiram na bosanskom. Dakle, samo ću se osvrnuti da sve ovo što sam rekla istovremeno su i preporuke, tako da ih neću ponavljati. Želim samo reći da, obzirom da je Đulija spomenula da jeste u Bosni i Hercegovini uočen određeni napredak kada je su u pitanju sastanci Odbora za stabilizaciju i pridruživanje. Želim reći da se taj sastanak ogleda u tome što je pitanje rodne ravnopravnosti stavljen na dnevni red. To je bio početak i kraj. Dakle, to je taj napredak. Došli smo do dnevnog reda i od dnevnog reda, mislim, nije raspravljano o tome. Hoću da kažem koliko su minimalni ti napreci, ali evo i to bilježimo. Naše preporuke, nismo bili zadovoljni ni prilikom razvijanja izrade klipa. Mislimo da nije u dovoljnoj mjeri uzet u obzir stavovi i glasovi organizacija civilnog društva. To je jako važno. To se apsolutno mora unaprijeti. Moja 5. minuta teče i sa njom završavam. Želim reći da što se tiče delegacije, naša želja je da sva poglavlja državnog izvještaja trebaju biti rodno osviještena. Hvala još jednom svima, na raspolaganju sam za odgovore.
Thank you, Diana. We can all agree that the women's rights are human rights, and we would add inevitable part of the rule of law framework. And we can also agree that we always need a less diplomatic and more sharper recommendation. Case of Kosovo will present Nicole Farnsworth, Program Director and Lead Researcher of the Kosovo Women Network. Nicole.
Thank you, Anita. I hope you can hear me. Great. So hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. For Kosovo, I can say we have a very long-term and excellent cooperation with both the European Union and with the government of Kosovo and the structures that are working for EU accession. We also presented our paper a few months ago, and we had also a very good discussion on the recommendations and how we, as civil society, the EU, the government, and other stakeholders can work together to further mainstream gender in the EU accession process. We really believe this is a joint process, and we're all here to support each other and learn from the lessons in the region and from our experiences together. Overall, in Kosovo, we can say that our report shows that gender mainstreaming of the EU accession process has improved. There are several indicators of this in our brief, which is also in our website. We can say the government has improved in gender mainstreaming its strategies and its action plans and drawing from civil society input, specifically women's rights organizations, via public consultation processes to better gender mainstream these documents. However, we must say that it has progressed minimally when it comes to implementing the recommendations of the European Commission in the Kosovo report pertaining to gender equality. We also were concerned that the EPA 3 strategic response was not made public nor discussed via public consultation processes, which could provide an opportunity for gathering civil society input on what are the financing priorities. And we could support, of course, gender mainstreaming this process. We were also saddened that gender equality mechanisms like the Agency for Gender Equality and the Office of the Prime Minister and gender equality officers in the ministries were not consulted either in the design of these action documents. Kosovo still doesn't have a gender equality index, and that makes it difficult when it comes to data that is disaggregated by sex, ethnicity, rural, urban location, and other key indicators. It also makes it difficult to compare data and the situation in Kosovo with the rest of the region and Europe. We do have some very good practices in Kosovo that we would like to highlight and suggest are worth replicating in the rest of the region. One is related to the SAA structures, the committee and subcommittee meetings that are held regularly between the EU and the government. In Kosovo, we have the unique practice that both the EU and the government individually consult with civil society regarding the agenda items of these meetings. And during those consultations, civil society has a space to provide suggestions on what should be priorities and discussed on this agenda. Often we get feedback immediately from both the EU and government as to whether the points can be included or not. And we are happy to say that very often gender equality related points are included on the agenda and discussed in these meetings. And this is a practice for involving diverse actors from civil society that we think would be excellent for other countries to consider. When we come to the EU, we also had a best practice here in Kosovo, where the Kosovo Women's Network was actually contracted by the EU to support the review and gender mainstreaming of other action documents, including outside the civil society facility. We, of course, had a confidentiality agreement, but it gave us the opportunity to draw in from our members, which is 140 diverse women's rights organizations in Kosovo, their thoughts and opinions when it comes to how we can gender mainstream different programs that are occurring. And this was a best practice in terms of institutionalizing the EU's consultations with civil society, specifically with women's rights groups, when it comes to programming and how to integrate a gender perspective. Now, our contract has ended, and we cannot speak to 2023 yet, but we do see that learning from this experience, perhaps the EU throughout the region could consider ways to institutionalize the gender mainstreaming of action documents through public consultations with civil society actors on those documents in the design phase. We do realize it is the responsibility of the government to come forth with their proposals on action documents, but the EU could encourage also the government to have these types of public consultations on funding priorities in the spirit of gender-responsive budgeting and participatory democracy. And then we did also look at the action documents. Despite our involvement, we did see that some of the action documents were mismarked in accordance with the OECD DAC criteria for marking action documents. Here we see there is a need throughout the region for more quality control when it comes to the actual marking of the documents using the gender marker. In Kosovo, we do have a best practice, and Helen perhaps may want to speak to it later in the discussion, where there were checklists developed for the marking of projects to help support staff in how they should mark the projects, what steps need to be taken, like first gender analysis, including sex disaggregated data, including objectives that respond to the inequalities identified through gender analysis, and then reporting on these. So perhaps these types of checklists could actually be integrated into the EU's management systems in terms of the structures that are needed to ensure that no matter who's sitting at the desk, the right steps are taken in reviewing and gender mainstreaming documents. And here, as a region, we have the recommendation that the OPSIS system can also be improved, as mentioned, and we echo what Julia said, the need to better track actual financing for gender equality and for women's rights groups in order to report on Gender Action Plan 3 and as a best practice in gender responsive budgeting generally. Looking forward, last sentence, I promise. The last sentence is, looking forward, we know this report's on 2022, but 2023 in Kosovo has been a challenging year when it comes to the political situation. And because of the measures taken by the EU against Kosovo, we have not had political dialogue. And in the spirit of women, peace, and security, this is very concerning for us because we have lost the opportunity to engage in political discussions linked to the EU accession process. But this will be a topic for our next report coming soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole, for sharing our experience. Once we in Montenegro learned about the good practices within the framework of the SAA subcommittees, then we use these practices to advocate for more opening up of the process in Montenegro, which takes us actually to our country. And Maja Rejčević, Executive Director of the Women's Rights Center, will present the case of Montenegro.
Thank you, Anita. I'll be mindful of time and quite short, so I will start immediately with our findings. I can say that after a backlash in EU integration noted in the last European Commission report, it seems that Montenegro got the new window of opportunity to become a frontrunner. However, only lately, after the establishment of the new governing structure in the Ministry for European Affairs, and after Women's Rights Center organized a very successful public event with the decision makers, followed by several bilateral meetings with the government members, gender equality finally got their attention. However, systemic response to some of the burning issues concerning rule of law and women's human rights is still awaited. Our monitoring practice showed that the gender mainstreaming of the EU accession process has improved by approximately 14% from 2021 to 2022. However, some developments noticed in 2023 warn us that the integration process is fragile, and that it can easily backslide if we do not push our agenda in more synchronized manner and on all levels of decision-making, from national to the EU. So far, proactive CCO initiatives in synergy with the EU requirements were bringing only tangible results. As regards EU level, although the issues of gender, women and girls are more visible in 2023 Commission reporting, with more references, official recommendations directed to Montenegro's commitment toward gender equality and efficient access to justice for women are still missing. This also affects the final assessment on gender mainstreaming of the last country report, which is the lowest compared to the previous 3 years. We need strong official recommendations from the EU to call our governments accountable to deliver EU required reforms. Another challenge is to follow overall extent of the implementation, as the reporting methodology generally does not build on previous recommendations, at least in the narrative of some chapters. This is why we believe that by systemizing position of gender focal points in delegations as the focal points for tripartite dialogue among women's civil society organizations, Brussels, and national stakeholders could contribute to better gender mainstreaming of these processes. On a more positive note, 2023 report provides sharper, more direct language and examples related to persistent problem of gender-based violence and human trafficking. Montenegro's CLIP revision process is another positive example of inclusive and intense dialogue among women CCOs and the EU delegation that resulted in informed context analysis of CLIP itself and better harmonization with IPA 3 programming areas. As for the IPA 3 action documents, little or no progress has been detected in correct gender marking, as colleagues already said. These documents allow Montenegrin government to conduct measures without exactly improving socioeconomic position of most vulnerable groups, particularly women and children. Gender responsible budgeting and related allocations of funds are still not traceable. Finally, when it comes to implementing the European Commission recommendations, the role of civil society organizations remain vital, which is why we in Women's Rights Center created an EU advocacy platform that included our national project partners and also some smaller NGOs from less developed part of the country. So we have a lesson learned that we need synergy of expertise of women's civil society organizations that are included in ongoing reforms and strong devotion from Brussels to fully implement GAP 3 commitments. At the end, I really want to thank first our partners that we actually managed together to learn a lot from each other and with whom we created, I would say, skillful and strong advocacy platform, but also to the openness of the EU partners who are listening, hopefully carefully to our recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. This is precisely why we are relying on a synergy of our expertise on national, but as well as the regional level, because we consider it, as Helen said, main drivers for change. I believe that in North Macedonia, the situation is pretty much the same with some national specifics. So I call Irina Yolevska, legal expert and gender researcher from Research in Action Reactor, to take the floor. Irina.
Thank you, Anita. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Irina from Reactor, and today I will be sharing some of the key insights from the North Macedonia country report. I will briefly just share my screen to make it maybe more easier to follow. In the first part of this brief presentation, I will focus on the challenges and successes in the inclusion of women's organizations in EU accession-related processes. In a general overview, we found that women's organizations were minimally to moderately consulted. For example, in reviewing the 2021 and 2022 country reports, we found that their input was moderately included in North Macedonia. And despite the positive practice of consulting civil society in the phases of preparing the report, there are some challenges to address here, as women's organizations' recommendations are sometimes generalized or simplified, and important details are overlooked. We also found a notable gap in civil society participation in the SAA processes in both monitoring years. And to encourage meaningful participation of women's organizations in these processes, it is important to increase transparency and accessibility of information. It is also important to recognize positive and highlight positive practices and examples, such as the consultations between the European Union delegation in North Macedonia and women's organizations in the preparation of the country-level implementation plan for GAP3. The diverse input that was gathered from both national and local organizations was then used in North Macedonia to create a joint written input on the gender equality state of affairs, which was then sent to the delegation. So we'll now shift our focus to national institutions. Collaboration between the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy in North Macedonia and women's organizations on laws and policies is evident. However, challenges exist here, such as local organizations face limited inclusion, and issues such as late notices and lack of follow-up persist. So it is important to refine our consultation process to ensure that all voices are not only heard, but actively considered, and we should strive to move towards not just minimal and moderate inclusion of women civil society organizations. Now turning to the national institutions which are responsible for the EU accession processes, specifically the Secretariat for European Affairs. In both monitoring years, we found that there was no dedicated gender focal point within this institution, and the existing gender expertise was primarily derived from previous experiences and informal trainings. And also, while this was noted as slight improvement in the report, we should highlight that the percentage of employees who received gender equality training in this institution increased from only 3.6% in 2021 to, again, only 6% in 2022. Now on the IPA 3 action documents, as was mentioned several times throughout the day, they have been sometimes incorrectly marked. So our rapid gender analysis revealed that the documents that were marked with gender marker 1 did not fully comply with the gender marker criteria, and references to women and gender were mostly confined to the gender mainstreaming section. But to end on a more positive note, we also observed a promising increase in the inclusion and consultation of gender focal points from line ministries in IPA programming. And in 2022, also in North Macedonia, we had the first action document, which was marked with gender marker 2, where gender equality was the principal objective. Continuing this practice of consulting gender focal points could contribute to action documents in the future that will fully adhere to the gender marker criteria. That would be all for me, and I'm staying here for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina, for being time-friendly. We would all agree that the more substantial and regular dialogue with all the stakeholders, especially the EU, is maybe the biggest priority at this point in order to have, as I said previously, synchronized approach. And finally, Voskre Naumoska Ilieva, Program Officer, Quina Tilquina, will speak a bit about Serbia case. Voskre?
I'll try to go into a few of the examples, make it more concretely of the findings that Julia already shared. And I will start with the action documents for IPA programming. Julia already shared the concerns, how these documents are incorrectly marked in different countries. And I will share the example of Serbia. So basically, there was a significant increase of funding dedicated to gender equality and women empowerment through the 2 years we monitored, 2021 and 2022, because in 2022, all 6 national action documents were marked with gender marker 1. To speak in figures, this meant that the funding dedicated to women's empowerment and gender equality from 15.5 million euros in 2021 increased to 168.7 million euros in 2022. As Julia mentioned, we went even further to see to what extent these action documents comply with the set criteria to be marked with this gender markers. There we saw that actually in reality, none of these 6 action documents complied with this criteria. They were missing gender analysis, and we know this is the crucial initial step if we want to mainstream documents and policies. And furthermore, 4 of them in the text explicitly said that the objectives and results are not designed to target gender equality. This creates uncertainty to what extent actually the funding, when these action documents are implemented, the funding on national and local level will in reality support gender equality and women empowerment. Action documents are the guiding documents for the IPA programming, and their importance should not be underestimated. And there should be a quality assurance process for making sure that gender markers are properly used, and then the funding really goes in support to gender equality and women empowerment. Both governments, government institutions, and EU should invest more in these processes. But the gap 3 doesn't only set the path for funding, it also sets the path for political dialogue. And Nicole already mentioned the good example of Kosovo with the consultations of women's rights organizations prior to SA committee and subcommittee meetings. Unfortunately for Serbia, this is not the case. Not only that women's rights organizations were not consulted in 2021-22 ahead of this meeting, we were also not able to find any publicly available information on the agendas, discussions, and consultations taking place on these meetings. EU accession is a process for citizens, and because of this, citizens need to be transparently informed about all processes taking place, but more importantly, they should be meaningfully engaged. As women's rights organizations represent the voices of diverse women, their seat at the table should be secured in these processes. And talking about secured places or chairs at the table, I would like to end with a positive example coming from Serbia, and that's the establishment of Women's Civil Society Organization Sounding Board, which is a kind of a mechanism to support the implementation of GAP3, meaning CLIP for Serbia. As this mechanism was established at the end of 2022, in the report, we were not able to reflect on the extent to which these consultations are happening, but I can say here that this mechanism has contributed significantly in increasing women's rights organizations' inclusion in EU accession processes and the political dialogue taking places with both EU delegations and member states. We are looking forward to seeing these consultations happening regularly, and also encouraging other countries to follow the example and set similar or same mechanisms for structured political dialogue with women's rights organizations. I will end here, and I'm here to answer any questions for different indicators for Serbia. Thank you.
Thank you, Voskra, for ending on a more, I would say, positive note. So throughout this module or discussion, we had the opportunity to raise some of the most important issues we were dealing within the framework of this project for the past 4 years. So we touched upon the existing advocacy mechanisms with the EU, but as well as the national stakeholders, and how can they be improved in order to be more transparent and inclusive. We also talked about some optimism that is sometimes all we have. We talked about the need for the stronger recommendations. We touched upon the sustainability of this project by sharing the example of the Montenegro, where we developed a new advocacy platform with the Women's Civil Society Organization, who will continue to work in a better synergy. And we, of course, touched upon from a diverse aspects for the issue of better mainstreaming of national strategies, but also the EU action starting from the EC reporting. And to conclude, let me be more personal at the end. It is really throughout this action that we additionally learn how to mainstream EU-related reform processes. And this is the knowledge that we then shared with the many people involved that were even coming from the stakeholders' position. So at this moment, I believe that it is really important to preserve established relations and the knowledge gained, and in the forthcoming period to push gender equality on the EU reform agenda even harder. That would be all from my side. Thank you for having your attention, and I will call Tanya to continue according to the agenda.
Thank you, Anita, for moderating this part of the session, and thank you to all the partners who have tried to fit in within the designated timing. We have a lot more to share, but since this is an online event, we thought that it would be too difficult to follow us if we are a bit longer than now. So we want to give the floor now to the key stakeholders as well as other participants for further reflections. I would just say thank you to all the partners who worked quite extensively on this exercise, which was pretty long, and it took us a lot of time and effort, especially during all the other things that were happening around the globe and Europe. So I would say that we are happy that we have concluded this exercise, and we are happy to continue with it beyond the action and project timelines, because we believe this is crucial as an exercise for all of us to be aware of all the positive and negative sides, all the shortcomings and forthcomings during the EU accession. And since this is the first time that we have monitored these processes in such a systematic way, we believe that we will follow up with another report shortly for 2023. So fingers crossed that this can happen sooner than later. And also, we believe that we will have a chance to monitor the EU accession without crisis one day, and that the world that we live in will be a better place. But I think we all have to contribute towards this. And when it comes to the Western Balkans, my colleagues have already said that the EU accession is one of the main drivers for democratic reforms and gender equality, furthering gender equality in the region. But also there were some missed opportunities that we have detected, and we believe that we can all learn from these lessons. I just wanted to mention one point, that gender analysis, which were a must in order to complete the clip, and they were missing because of the many challenges that were happening throughout 2020 and 2021. But this is where our action actually further contributed, because we managed to provide sector analysis at country level. A total of 15 sector analyses were produced, and we can share this with any interested stakeholders after the event, because it will be too difficult to follow all the sectors. But I just want to mention that we have analyzed different sectors across different countries, and we have contributed towards more data when it comes to economy and finance, businesses, statistics, political participation of women in different areas, social policies, care sector and labor market, digitalization and ICT, as well as ownership structures, media and agriculture are among the sectors that we have tried to explore and contribute to the programming of both national documents, but also IPA programming at wider regional level. So to cut my point of view now, I will leave the floor to the reflections that our panelists or the audience can have, and I invite you to share your opinion on what has been said or what we have missed to say, of course. So if any inspiration is out there, please raise your hand or simply open the mic if you're part of the panelists. And if not, you can also use the Q&A button that is in the low screen of Zoom. So any reflections, any further comments, any questions? I see Mirela Archimandriti is raising her hand. Mirela comes from Albania, but she can introduce herself once she is given the chance to speak. I hope my colleagues are following and they can open the floor for Mirela. Okay. Mirela, can you? Okay, and then we have someone else here. So I hope Mirela can say something. And
can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah. Great.
Good. Okay.
Perfect.
But you don't see me.
Unfortunately, no, because you are in. Yeah, but
no
my
problem,
colleagues can
no
help.
problem.
My colleagues can help with visibility if they can add you to the panelists. I think.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. No problem.
And then
first
Emma
of all,
is waiting. Sorry.
Yeah. Yes. First of all, congratulations for this the overall project that you have implemented. Completely dedicated to gender equality aspects and for the wide range of issues that you have tackled, especially the reports, the unique reports that you have produced for the more engagement of EU and more dedication of EU on gender equality. I hope that these reports will be of a great basis for EU reflections and for better inclusion of gender equality aspects in the European Union aid. I would like to go directly to the recommendations in order not to have more, let's say, to take a lot of space in this discussion. And as you have said that to leave the politically correct aside and directly speak openly what we are missing in the Western Balkans related to gender equality advancement. From the point of view of consultations. We would like to have arranged dedicated consultations with EU, with women, civil society organizations on different issues related to the different fields that women CSOs are actively engaged, and not just some consultations that have been done in a very short, let's say, period, or very specific, and when many actors are involved and you don't have time to really speak about gender equality. Of course, is the written contribution a possibility, but this is not enough. So about women issues and gender equality, we need dedicated consultation from European Union in each European Union delegation in each of our countries. The project that we undertake, in fact, even this project are insufficient and lack sustainability. So if the project like this one will not continue, the voice of gender equality and agency will remain weak, and it will have these pauses and spaces in between, and this is not good. Of course, organizations in the region are working in different topics. However, concentrated voice, it is not, should receive support and financial support, I mean, in order to be more enforced. Allocate specific funding with EU aid packages to support women CSOs in the Western Balkans. This funding should be earmarked for projects and initiatives that advance gender equality and women empowerment. Another topic that I would like to raise is to embrace a participatory strategy that engages women civil society organizations. Of course, FLIP is very good. However, FLIP should be maintained and should be updated. And the excellent example that Nicole gave from Kosovo about the facilitation of joint activities with the committee on social issues, and how women NGOs are involved, is a fantastic example that EU could facilitate an exchange program as an example with other EU delegations in each of the countries of the Western Balkans. Another thing is to provide targeted capacity building and technical assistance to strengthen the organizational capacity of women CSOs in the Western Balkans, and to make a kind of networking and collaboration with women CSOs in the EU member states, and to learn from each other and start kind of consortium in different projects, because we have seen projects that are dedicated only for EU member states and only for countries like us, Western Balkans, but we have not seen much on gender equality funds dedicated for a joint program where both governmental structures dedicated to gender equality and women CSOs from our countries with EU member states structures can have the possibility to be involved, to learn from each other, etc. In Albania, I would like to see a gender index updated, because we have a gender index report in 2020. However, we need another one updated and with better coverage of some fields that have not been included in the first one, such as gender-based violence. So this is more or less my intervention, and I really congratulate for the fantastic project, for the fantastic collaboration that we have as a sub-grantee with Albanian Women Empowerment Network, but as well as with you as a network. And especially with the fact that you have dedicated a specific methodology that helped a lot in improving the gender equality discussion in our region and countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mirela. Just to let the participants know that Mirela was part of the Albanian team that produced the monitoring report, if I'm not mistaken, and she is quite familiar with this topic. So thank you for pointing out a few more points that we couldn't maybe share during the very limited time that we had during the national discussions. What you were saying wraps up very perfectly with one of the key recommendations and one of the key gaps that we have discovered, which refers to transparency, timeliness, and systematic approach, as well as structured dialogue with women's civil society organizations, but also other civil society organizations in general, because we see that there is a broken feedback loop, even when there are consultations. But you also mentioned the timeliness in this process, which is crucial if we want to have substantial feedback at the end of the day. And I would also mention that what you were also saying goes in line with one of the key messages that Helen shared at the beginning, and that is that gender equality structures need to be built and functional regardless of the specifics and individual commitments of the people involved in different institutions, because this is how we can ensure sustainability and systematic approaches toward the important questions that we are discussing today, because we all know that positive examples can easily fall apart if we don't have the structure in place, and especially in times when rapid responses are needed. And I believe we live in very interesting times and very challenging times. So yes, we have two more raised hands. One of them is our former task manager, who is also in the audience, but I will give the floor to Helen first, and then Emma Ashuti will take the floor. She used to be the task manager of this action for 2 years, and she has found some time to participate to this event. So we are really thankful for Emma being here. And once Helen has her reflections, Emma can also jump in. Thank you, Helen.
No, thank you. I wanted to come in because then I will unfortunately need to leave. And just to say that, you know, we me and Daniele, who's also connecting, who's the current task manager, we work in an operational unit, right? So we're not in charge of gender mainstreaming beyond our own contracts, right? So, but we have quite a few regional contracts. It's around 85, and so we do this work a lot in all of the sectors. And luckily for us, it's let's say it's more kind of, it's easier in the sense that it's more traditionally, you know, we work with people, we work with, you know, employment issues, social inclusion. So it kind of lends itself to gender mainstreaming. In other parts of the house, in DG NEAR, and I'm sure it's the same experience in DG INPA, it's more difficult. And so I can't really speak to the mainstreaming in general, as it's not something I'm directly in charge of, nor the reporting. I can just share with you the difficulties as an operational unit to make sure that that the reporting is correct, you know, because like you have found a lot of misreporting, I've also found in my own work, you know, and I think we need to indeed find a system where it's more in. When I was working with Nicole in from the EU office in Kosovo, we came up with a lot of ideas that we could easily implement, like the checklist. It's not as easy in HQ, you know, and so we continue to try to struggle with this. But you know, the main point is that there's still a lot of work to be done, and I think your recommendations are super valuable. And you know, I've already been chatting with Daniela on the side to, you know, we need to share this with this person, with this person, with that person, with that person, with this unit, with that unit, you know. And so just to express my appreciation for you, for the project, and it's a shame that it's ending, but it was really good work that has been done. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen, both for reflecting on the difficulties within the internal unit, and for the advocacy support that you and Daniela are planning. Also, hi to Daniela, our current task manager, who is also in the audience. And if he wants to say anything, he can have the floor, of course. This was very important to mention because we know that when it comes to human resources, something that our governments are often mentioning as a key challenge for dealing with IPA 3 programming and timely actions. But we are all suffering from that because, as you mentioned, 85 actions being handled within a small unit is not an easy thing. And I think this is why this cooperation is important, because with joint forces we can try to see more and try to address the issues that we have found out, or the lessons that we can learn both at national and regional, but also at EU level. I need to mention that DG Info was also invited, but they don't see they couldn't find time to join us today, and they believe that DG NEAR is the key responsible body for this. However, we believe that one of our recommendations is closer cooperation between the two DGs, because it is crucial for DG Info to be involved, especially because their focus is on the South, Global South and Western Balkans compared to the Global South and the rest of the planet. It's so tiny that it can easily get lost in policy and planning. So we believe that DG NEAR is our key ally, but we will continue to insist on advocacy at DG Info level as well, so that we can support one another in making the region more visible and making the changes sooner than later. Irene and Chloe, the key gender focal persons in the DG NEAR that combine the two DGs, were also busy on this day, and we know how difficult it is to be everywhere at the same time, because February is quite busy, which is why we decided to have this event online instead of face-to-face, because it was so difficult to gather the people at one place. And we are happy that COVID pandemic has learned us a lesson, saying that we can also do this online sometimes when there is no possibility for face-to-face interaction. So thank you, Helen, for being here and for taking the time to stay with us almost until the end. And now I give the floor to Emma Chuti, who wanted to say something, and I invite her to have her reflection.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Emma, we can hear you. Thank you.
Nice to see you all, and thanks for inviting me. It was very interesting. I'm happy everything we planned was done. Also, I see that there are improvements in the last in these years taken into consideration for the report. Just I wanted to mention one thing I was thinking when you were presenting, especially Julia mentioned about OPSIS. There is this analysis on, let's say, quantitative data on funding. But with OPSIS, we can enlarge this, the Commission can enlarge a bit the assessment of the qualitative aspects. And you mentioned specifically the how the EU and the engagement of the EU can reach the different NGOs, which is specifically a qualitative way to look at. And I wanted to underline that this for DG HIMPA, which is actually the line DG for DG NEAR about this kind of reporting, together also with DG JUST, that this was always mentioned as a very important point by DG IMPA. So to reach out NGOs, communities, religious representatives, and try to engage them in the gender mainstream. Of course, in DG NEAR, what they do, it's very much institutionalized and related to the accession process. But I think that this aspect can be expanded in the analysis from your point of view and from OPSIS, of course. And I want to underline that it's not only DG NEAR that is in charge of this, but every single contractor can input. So the indicators can be improved by the contractors themselves. And I think that this is already an important point for implementation and expanding the quality of the data the EU can gather. The other point was about the sequencing of reporting. Again, IMPA is very important in this because remember we had issues when I was working there, the engineer, with the sequencing of collection of data. So for the next reporting, more alignment on how the EU and IMPA work on the internal report is always the best thing to do. And I think I hope now that the contract is over, so I don't know what will happen in the future, but if you continue work, this sequencing is very important for operational, from the operational point of view. And this will increase the inclusion and transparency, which was your first point, which is crucial for your work. What I want to say, it's on the action documents, what you said, it's key. Personally, I did this when I did the last regional action document I produced. I engaged the contractors, so also you, and I also tried in that moment to engage as Ilan was mentioning, the other sections, especially the infrastructures. The section works on the Western Balkan Investment Fund, and on this, I would like to suggest all of you to try to, and tell me if maybe it's wrong, because waiting for a structure and an institutionalization from each delegation to engage you, it takes time. So maybe, or to have a TA contract like Nicole in Kosovo, this was a decision by the delegation. So, but from the bottom, so from down, I would actually think on how to approach informally each section, working on especially digital agenda and green, because now with the growth plan, these are the main infrastructures, these are the main contracts that you will see growing the next 2 years. So try to engage informally with the sections that work on infrastructures and try and digital and green, and try to enter there. So to use this as entry point and provide, if possible, your support, or at least promote your engagement in an informal way, because with the task managers directly, because this could help to build this kind of engagement also from a more operational side, and this could help then to bring it up to more a strategic and more let's say political or policy dialogue level. So you can also help the colleagues in the operational level to push for this inclusion of gender experts and gender perspectives into the action documents and the operations planning. So this was what I wanted to mention. Thank you very much again, and I wish you all the best, and congratulations for the conclusion and the success of the program. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Emma. This was quite a constructive approach to what we were saying, and maybe framing it in how it functions at national level. Emma was with us during the drafting of the methodology, and we had really many months of communication and consultations. So it's good to have her here again at the closure of this section. I would also want to say that what Emma was suggesting is already happening, and it's because of such actions like this one, and exercises like the monitoring and assessing the EU accession processes in the different countries. Because what we have also detected is that, of course, we cannot wait for an infrastructure to take place. We need to act, especially because in times of crisis, women's rights are the first to be on the list to suffer consequences. So one of our approaches is a kind of a guerrilla approach, and reaching out different people at national level and trying to discuss this with them, so that one day we can come to a more strategic policy dialogue that is still missing. And this is an obligation of all the involved stakeholders, including us, of course. And when it comes to the OPSIS system that Emma mentioned, which is the administration system for handling programming and finances for different EU contracts, of course, it's a mutual obligation for all of us to timely and properly encode our activities and indicators within our own contract, and then EU can follow the results even more easily if we do so. So I believe that we can all contribute to a more informed and more strategic policy dialogue if we follow the steps that we have been discussing now. And I'm not sure if anyone else has any comments. We have 5 more minutes to go. And if there are no attendees who want to comment or pose a question, we can have 5 minutes for final reflections. But let me check if anyone else. I don't think we have anyone. It is not, the topic that we are discussing is not quite palpable, and only if translated into actual actions on the ground and how this can help the citizens of our countries, I think that we can instigate more questions. But this is our next step. We want to translate what we are doing to a more practical level, so that we can have the feedback from the citizens who are the final beneficiaries of activities like this. And if there is no one else to speak at the very end, we can close the event by having some closing remarks and addressing everything that has been said so far. And to do this, I think that I can invite one of the partners to have their final closing remarks. And I would just want to mention that one of the key goals that we had with this action is to holding governments in EU accountable, but also supporting and strengthening the civil society organizations across the region, especially women civil society organizations, which is why we had 30 sub-granted organizations in 6 different countries, and they separately have produced over 30 different reports monitoring and gender analysis across the region. So we did present this at the Gender Equality Forum in September. That's why we have avoided this topic here. And the major idea behind this event was advocacy and joint effort. So in that line, we will keep ourselves from saying more details about the action, but we will allow Nicole from the from Kosovo Women's Network to give her to say her final remarks and close the event with her own point of view. Thank you, Nicole.
Well, I will try to bring in the points that the partners have mentioned, but there are many, so I cannot reiterate all of them. But a few of the key trends that have come out that I've heard is first the importance of political dialogue and engaging women's rights groups in all political dialogues, whether by governments or by the EU. This is important not just in the context of the Gender Action Plan 3, but also in the Women, Peace and Security agenda of the European Union and of our country's national commitments to engage women's rights groups actively, to have inclusive consultations with diverse women's rights organizations representing all different women, rural areas, women with disabilities, speaking different languages, to gather different perspectives, to recognize women's rights groups' expertise that they have to offer for these processes, and to ensure that these discussions are meaningful, transparent, timely, and systematic. There's a need for more systematic consultations that happen regularly based on an agenda and a schedule, both by the government and by the EU, to ensure that women's voices are heard and to take great expertise to contribute to the EU accession process from a gender perspective. The SAA subcommittee meetings in Kosovo was one good practice that was mentioned. It could also be considered in other countries in terms of both the EU and governments consulting with civil society to inform these processes. A second key point is that political will is important. And we heard this in our national discussions as well when we released the paper. It's important that the leadership of the EU and of the government is committed to furthering gender equality. And here we need more efforts on all sides. Yet, as Helen noted, we also cannot be held hostage to individual commitment. So we also need structures in place that will ensure that gender mainstreaming is happening and that consultations are happening. And that can be part of the structural approach of the EU and our governments in terms of bringing our perspectives, women's rights perspectives, into this accession process. Specifically linked to action documents, there could be structured dialogue with women's rights groups on what should be the financing priorities and how to integrate a gender perspective in those financing priorities. And we could see changes if INTIPA and DG NIR, with our support, could collaborate to revise OPSIS. Yes, it's the responsibility of contractors to have indicators and targets, but the EU can also require reporting on financing by adding fields to OPSIS where financing for gender equality, financing for women's rights groups must be reported. And this can be done with support to third parties, which is currently not tracked and is actually not good for the EU because there is so much support going to women's rights organizations that they can actually not report on because there's no system for tracking it. So changing these systems at a global level could actually help the EU better monitor, set baselines and targets for its financing for both gender equality and for women's rights groups. And the last issue that came up that I would highlight is the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which is very related to GAP3 and is very crucial in our region. And the need to really take it seriously, to do gender analysis, conflict analysis, gendered conflict analysis on the situations, to evaluate how EU measures and interventions are going to affect diverse women and men, and what the EU can do to support women's voices in coming forward amidst conflict and security issues. And this is an area that really needed more attention. In closing, I would just say that this action, I would say from a personal perspective as well, has been wonderful in working with all of these amazing activists and many others whose faces are not here, but I see their names in the list of participants. Learning from each other, supporting each other, and having feminist solidarity that helps us move forward together in this work. This isn't the end of the story. We are a coalition, EquaPro. We are not tied to any action. We will continue our work. It won't be as well financed. We will try to find other options, but we will still continue to work together, also with support from Kvinnetil Kvinne Foundation and others in this work that we're doing. I know many partners are planning to continue using this monitoring methodology and to continue to try to hold accountable the EU and the government in the EU accession process. And in doing this, we want to emphasize that we want to work together. This is not a critical exercise, but rather one where we can identify opportunities to learn from each other and how we can all work together, civil society, government, EU, other actors, to further integrate a gender perspective in the EU accession process. So we continue this road together with you and look forward to our continued cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for putting it all together and concluding this event. Just to mention for all the participants, if you're interested in either more regional or national level details, you can always contact us and you can find the reports published on our websites. There will be national reports available for all the 6 Western Balkan countries, including the regional overview and reports that Julia prepared and presented during this event today. I would also like to thank you everybody for staying until the end of this event, and to thank all the partners and contributors and the sub-grantees who contributed to the results of this action. And as Nicole mentioned, we want to work beyond contractual obligations and continue our progress regardless of the ending of this action. I believe that the coalition that we have built, called EquaPro, will continue functioning and monitoring the EU accession process, finding our own ways and contributing to the overall progress of the region. So once again, thank you all, and wishing you a good day and all the best in your lives and work.